The air at the Cheyenne livestock auction was thick with dust, diesel, and indifference. Metal gates clanged, boots scuffed against concrete, and the low hum of cattle mingled with the auctioneer's booming voice as he rattled off numbers like a machine. Nobody came to this place looking for grace. They came for utility, livestock that pulled weight, herded stock, and earned their keep. Then came the silence. It wasn't planned. It didn't arrive with fanfare. It just descended the moment a handler led in a limping, mud-streaked German shepherd. He looked like a ghost trying to remember how to walk in the land of the living. His right hind leg dragged behind him with a tired shuffle, every movement stiff and trembling. His fur was patchy, dulled by old scars and newer grime. Around his neck was the shadow of a chain, a faded ring of hairless skin that clung like a bad memory. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just stood there, alone, trembling under the weight of 100 blank stares. The auctioneer paused. Lot 189. German shepherd, male, approximate age, 6 or 7. Owner surrendered, no medical history. Starting bid, $100. Silence. Someone coughed. Another laughed softly. The handler didn't even look back as he unhooked the leash and stepped away, like he already knew this wouldn't take long. That one's done for. Probably bit someone. Won't fetch a dime. Still, the auctioneer tried again. Do I hear 100, 75, 50? No hands rose, not one. Just as he lifted his gavel to end it, someone in the back raised a hand, a single gesture. Quiet, unshaking. Every head turned. The man hadn't been there a moment ago, or maybe he had, just not in a way that anyone noticed. He stood alone, wearing a faded canvas jacket and boots streaked with the red clay of Wyoming roads. His silver-streaked hair peeked out from beneath an old ranger cap, and a scar ran down the right side of his jaw like a lightning bolt caught mid-flash. The auctioneer blinked. Sold. Lot 189, gentleman in the back. A murmur passed through the crowd. Some folks looked confused. Others scoffed. Caleb Turner? Someone whispered. Ain't seen him in years. He didn't respond. He just walked forward, steady and silent, until he reached the German shepherd. The dog's head lifted slightly, ears twitching, but he didn't move otherwise. Caleb crouched down and placed a hand, calloused, slow, and deliberate, on the dog's shoulder. He didn't grab, didn't tug, just rested his hand there. You're coming home with me, he murmured, just loud enough for the dog in the dust to hear. The German shepherd didn't pull away. In fact, he leaned in, just slightly. Just enough. A teenage girl near the rails lifted her phone, caught the moment on video. She didn't know why, exactly. Just that something about it made the world feel quieter. Later that week, the footage would go viral. The man who raised his hand, they'd call it. But in that moment, no one understood what they'd witnessed. No one but Caleb. He slipped a looped rope around the shepherd's neck like it was holy cloth, not a leash. The dog moved with him, limping but not resisting. Step by step, they left the ring together as the auction moved on, indifferent. Outside, the Wyoming wind cut sharp across the lot. But Caleb didn't flinch. He helped the dog into the back of his pickup, an old Ford with a dented fender and a quiet engine. Inside, he'd laid out a faded blanket and a plastic water bowl. Nothing fancy, just a gesture that said, "You matter now." The shepherd curled up tightly as if he didn't quite believe it yet. Caleb slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and began the long drive back toward Medicine Bow National Forest. Hours passed. pines thickened on either side of the narrow road. The sky melted from orange to deep blue. Caleb didn't speak. He just drove with the kind of focus that comes from silence learned the hard way. When he pulled up to his cabin, a modest log place nestled beneath towering firs, he let the truck idle for a second. Then he stepped out, moved to the back, and carefully lifted the dog in his arms. The shepherd was lighter than he expected, bones beneath skin, pain beneath pride. Inside, the cabin was simple. Warmth from a wood stove, a braided rug, a rocking chair older than most folks in town. Caleb laid the dog, no, not dog, not anymore, onto the blanket near the fire and covered him gently with an old wool throw. "You'll sleep," Caleb said quietly, "when you're ready." The dog didn't close his eyes, but he didn't shake either. Later that night, after a pot of black coffee and a silence that hung heavier than Wyoming snow, Caleb sat on the floor beside him. "I've seen eyes like yours," he said, "on men who've survived things they don't speak of." The shepherd watched him. "You'll need a name. Rook." Caleb nodded. "Rook it is." The dog didn't flinch at the sound. His ears twitched, just once. And when Caleb reached out again, slow, steady, Rook didn't pull away. Instead, his head fell gently onto Caleb's thigh. And that was enough. But as Caleb leaned forward to stroke his side, he noticed something. A pattern of raised skin, circular, not a scar from a fence or a fight, but a burn. Precise, repeated, like someone had used a device made to train by pain. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He knew what that meant. He'd seen it before, in places he'd rather forget. "God damn it," he whispered, running a hand down his face. "What did they do to you?" Rook didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because that night, in the quiet of the woods, beneath the shifting shadows of a fire that refused to die, Caleb Turner realized something he hadn't let himself feel in years. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a reckoning. The sun barely crested over the ridge when Caleb woke to the soft crackling of embers and the familiar weight of the cold seeping in through the chinked logs of the cabin. He moved slowly, every muscle aching from a restless night, and glanced toward the fireplace. Rook hadn't moved. The German shepherd lay exactly where Caleb had placed him, on the old flannel blanket, his body curled tight, eyes open, unblinking, not asleep, not relaxed, just watching. Caleb didn't say anything. He poured himself a mug of coffee thick enough to stain wood and took a long sip, grimacing at the bitterness. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was measured. Like both understood, there were pieces to this silence that had to be handled with care. He sat down a shallow bowl next to Rook. Chicken, rice, and a splash of broth. It wasn't gourmet, but it was warm and real. The dog didn't move. Caleb pulled the rocking chair forward, sat near the fire, and picked up a worn paperback. Didn't read it, just held it. More habit than purpose. Minutes passed. Then, inch by inch, Rook lifted his head. He sniffed the air. Slowly and cautiously, he rose to his feet, his hind leg trembling beneath him, and took a hesitant step toward the bowl. Caleb didn't look, didn't speak. Rook ate in silence, stopping every few bites to look over his shoulder like he expected the kindness to vanish. Like somewhere in the marrow of his bones, kindness meant danger. Afterward, Rook lay back down, his body folding like a paper map, all angles and corners. Caleb finally spoke, voice barely above the crackle of wood. "That burn mark," he muttered, mostly to himself. "It's not random." He reached over slowly, brushing Rook's fur aside near the shoulder. The dog tensed but didn't snap. Under the coat, more evidence. faint scars, raised welts, and tiny punctures. None fresh, all deliberate. Someone trained you with pain. Rook looked away. Later that afternoon, Caleb took Rook outside. The sky was low with winter's breath, and the woods stood quiet, as if they too were waiting. The dog moved stiffly, each step cautious, his nose twitching at every unfamiliar scent. Caleb led him just past the tree line, toward a small clearing with a view of the lake. He knelt, brushing his hand over frost-tipped grass. Used to be peaceful here. Still is mostly. If you stay long enough, you'll feel it. Rook didn't respond, but he didn't bolt either. That was enough. That night, while Caleb split kindling by hand near the porch, a knock echoed off the cabin's front door. 3 firm raps. Caleb froze mid-swing, the hatchet hanging in the air. No one knocked out here. He opened the door slowly. Standing there was a woman in a worn brown field coat and jeans tucked into muddy boots. A silver badge clipped to her belt flashed under the porch light. "Evening," she said, removing her hat. "Deputy Marshal Aaron Blake. You Caleb Turner?" "I am," he said cautiously. "Mind if I come in for a few minutes?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Don't see why not." Inside, Rook watched from the far side of the room, ears perked, tail still. The dog didn't growl, but the way he stared made Caleb's gut tighten. Aaron looked around, taking in the wood stove, the tin coffee mug, the neatness of the space. "Got a call about a break-in out at the old Harper place. Not much left of it, but someone tore through the barn, left in a hurry. Figured you might know the layout. Word is you used to do contract work there." Caleb didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured her a cup of coffee. Strong, hot, no sugar. "You said Harper Ranch?" he asked finally. "Yeah," Aaron replied, watching him closely. Caleb glanced toward Rook. The dog was trembling. At the sound of the name, Harper, his body had shifted. Low rumbles vibrated in his throat, but not like aggression. It was memory, fear, pain. Caleb knelt beside him. "Easy," he whispered. Rook didn't bark. He didn't bolt, but his eyes turned wild, distant, haunted. Deputy Blake narrowed her eyes. "That dog, was he—" "Picked him up at the Cheyenne auction 3 days ago," Caleb interrupted. "Wasn't supposed to be anything, just a stray." "That's no stray," she said. "He knows something." "I think you're right," Caleb murmured. Then he stood and walked toward the shelf by the stove, pulling down a small, leather-bound notebook. Its edges were frayed, dusty. He flipped through the pages slowly. Handwritten notes, names, jobs, small dates. Contracts, times he'd gone to Harper Ranch, paid in cash, asked no questions. His jaw clenched as he found an entry from 5 years ago. 2 shepherds delivered, no handler present. Requested direct drop, paid in advance. He hadn't thought twice at the time. Just another job, another paycheck. Now, looking at Rook, those eyes, those scars, it was like the sins he ignored had come home in flesh and fur. "I need to show you something," he said to Aaron. She leaned in. He showed her the notebook, the dates, the signatures. "I think they were training dogs out there," Caleb whispered. "Not for hurting, for hurting." Aaron took the book, flipping through the pages quickly. She didn't speak for a moment, but her expression tightened. "You willing to talk more, officially?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Yeah, I'm done staying quiet." Rook had curled into a ball again near the fire, but Caleb noticed something. His breathing was calmer now, no longer shallow, like maybe, just maybe, the first layer of armor had cracked. But Caleb knew. This was only the beginning. The ghosts they'd buried at Harper Ranch, in backwoods deals, in auction yards, were rising. And one of them was wearing a badge and a grin, somewhere out there, waiting to finish what he started. The Harper Ranch sat like a forgotten scar on the edge of the plains, its fences collapsing under the weight of time and silence. The barn, once painted red, had long since faded to a washed-out pink. The roof bowed inward like it had exhaled its last breath. Wind curled through broken slats, carrying with it the smell of dust, rust, and something else Caleb couldn't quite name. But Rook knew it. The dog stepped out of the truck and stood still for a full minute, his body tense, his ears pinned. The wind caught his fur, but he didn't flinch. He simply stared ahead at the barn with a look that dug under Caleb's ribs like a blade. They moved slowly, side by side. Rook's limp had lessened over the last few days, but the tension in his shoulders returned with every step closer to the barn. Caleb could feel it in the leash, like static. Like Rook's whole body remembered something his mind couldn't quite translate. When they reached the back pasture, Rook stopped. It wasn't hesitation. It was pinpoint accuracy. The grass was higher here, wild thistles curling through busted chicken wire. An old trough lay overturned nearby, riddled with bullet holes. And then, Rook began to dig. Not furiously, but methodically. Like he knew what was buried. Caleb dropped to his knees beside him and helped, brushing aside dry earth and brittle leaves. It wasn't deep, just enough to hide what someone hoped would be forgotten. Metal scraped Caleb's fingertips. He pulled it free. A rusted box, dented, the latch barely holding. He pried it open with a pocket knife. Inside was rotten revelation. Photographs, dozens of them. All German shepherds, some in cages, some muzzled, some mid-snarl, caught in motion, eyes wide with panic. On the back of each photo, scribbled in pen, a name, a number, and a note. Aggressive. Unfit. Reroute to LR. LR, Caleb muttered, flipping through the images faster. One photo stopped him cold. It was Rook, smaller, younger, his ribs stuck out like fence posts. A thick collar around his neck bore the number 1479. The chain ran from the collar to the wall behind him, and standing a few feet away, blurred but unmistakable, was Caleb. Not looking at the dog, looking away. He sank onto the grass, throat dry. Rook stood nearby, watching. His breathing had changed. Not panicked, measured. Like he too recognized that moment. The click of a shutter that had captured a history neither of them could rewrite. Caleb rifled deeper into the box. Documents, handwritten ledgers, itemized deliveries, one invoice with his own signature at the bottom. Shoeing services plus trailer transport. Delivery to L. Reddick. Caleb's hand curled into a fist. Lawrence Reddick. He hadn't heard that name in almost 6 years. But it hit now like a punch to the chest. Reddick had been a whisper back then, never seen, always paid in cash. A man who moved through back doors and shadows, who knew how to make things disappear. The kind of man you didn't ask questions around. Caleb had heard the rumors. Dogs disappearing from training camps, reappearing months later as weapons in illegal rings. But back then, he needed the work. And so he signed where they told him to sign, turned a blind eye when trailers barked too loud or rocked too violently. And now Rook was standing here, the living receipt of that silence. A flash of movement near the collapsed corral pulled Caleb from his thoughts. He stood, shielding his eyes from the setting sun. A shadow darted past the corner of the barn. Quick, human-sized, not wind, not an animal. "Hey," he called out. Rook growled, low and steady. Caleb ran toward the barn, Rook keeping pace despite the limp. but when they rounded the corner, no one was there. Just dust still settling, and a boot print fresh in the dirt. Someone had been watching them. Caleb's pulse pounded. He scanned the tree line. Nothing but silence and the dying light of dusk. Back inside the barn, he checked the stalls. Most were empty. One still had claw marks on the door. Another had a length of rusted chain bolted to the floor, stained with something dark and long since dried. He knelt beside the chain, brushing his fingers over the metal. "Damn you, Reddick," he whispered. "You made monsters out of the ones meant to guard us." Back at the truck, Caleb locked the rusted box in the bed, then looked down at Rook. The dog's eyes met his, still unsure but no longer unreadable. There was something else now. Recognition, memory, maybe even forgiveness. "We're not done," Caleb said. Rook's tail thumped once against the tire. As they drove off, Caleb caught one last glimpse of the ranch in the rearview mirror. The sagging roofline, the fields littered with broken posts, the barn where ghosts whispered between the rafters. And for the first time in years, he didn't look away. He drove straight to the sheriff's station in Laramie, the rusted box riding shotgun, and asked to speak with Deputy Marshal Blake. When she arrived, he set the photos down in front of her. "You're going to want to see this," he said. "And you're going to want a warrant for a man named Lawrence Reddick." She raised an eyebrow. "That name's supposed to mean something to me?" "It will," Caleb replied. It meant everything to Rook. The morning light sliced through the fog like a scalpel. Caleb stood at the base of the cabin steps, boots planted in frosted grass. Rook by his side. Neither of them had slept much. The silence between them was no longer strained. It was shared, like two soldiers waiting for the next shot to ring out. After the visit to the Harper Ranch, after the box, the photos, the signature, Caleb knew he couldn't ignore the past anymore. And neither could Rook. They needed answers. Real ones. Answers buried deep, not just in fields, but in people. And one person might still be able to help. Caleb steered the truck toward the town of Laramie, then past it, taking a long gravel road to a modest veterinary clinic tucked behind a line of golden aspens. The sign out front was barely legible. Dr. Natalie Kim, DVM. The building was simple, but the windows were spotless. The trim painted a calm shade of blue. Caleb hesitated at the door. They hadn't spoken in over 5 years. Natalie had been more than just a vet, once. But things broke. Words went unsaid. Regrets lingered. Still, if anyone could make sense of what had happened to Rook, and what was still happening, it was her. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. Natalie looked up from the exam table, startled. Her hands froze mid-motion, gloved fingers wrapped around a vial. "Caleb Turner," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and guarded caution. "Well, hell. I figured the next time I saw you, you'd be bleeding out or ghosting town again." He gave her a tired half-smile. "It's good to see you too, Nat." Her eyes dropped to the floor and saw the dog. Rook stood in the doorway, stiff-legged but calm. His fur had filled out slightly since the auction, and though his limp remained, his presence was stronger now. He didn't bark. He didn't shrink back. He just watched her, eyes like twin cinders. "Bring him in," she said after a long beat. "Let's take a look." In the exam room, the fluorescent lights buzzed low. Caleb lifted Rook onto the table gently, and Natalie began her inspection with careful, practiced hands. No words were exchanged for several minutes. Just the quiet sounds of latex brushing fur and the soft breaths of a dog still learning how to be still without fear. He's been through hell, Natalie finally murmured, peeling back layers of fur along his ribs. This scarring, it's not random. See this? She pointed to a pattern of circular scars under Rook's left flank. Electrical burns, likely from shock prods. And here. She pressed near his hip. This was surgical, crude. Someone tried to fix a brakes with makeshift tools. Caleb's throat tightened. He was trained to fight. Natalie's face changed, hardening into something more clinical, more focused. Not just fight, obey, submit. This level of conditioning isn't backyard abuse. It's institutional. She turned to the computer, pulled out a small scanner, and waved it along Rook's neck. Beep. A line of code blinked on the screen, then a string of numbers. Then, names. A name popped up at the top of the registry. Subject number 1479. Male, German Shepherd. Tag origin, crossbow tactical program. Natalie leaned in, reading aloud. Initial handler, L. Reddick. Location, closed training facility, Fremont County. Program, behavioral subjugation and response initiative. Notes, high response, controllable aggression. Retired due to facility shutdown. Caleb blinked. Crossbow, that was government. Was, Natalie confirmed. Shut down 5 years ago after reports of animal rights violations. Whistleblower leaked footage of dogs being broken. Reddick was the handler on record. Disappeared right after the shutdown. Caleb swallowed. His voice came quieter now. There's more, isn't there? Natalie clicked deeper into the file, then froze. There's a video in his chip archive. She glanced at him. You sure you want to see it? Play it, Caleb said without hesitation. The screen flickered to life. Grainy footage, time-stamped 7 years ago. A concrete enclosure, cold walls, 3 handlers in padded suits. A younger Rook, eyes wide, body tense, stood on a platform. He was barking, confused, glancing at a cage across the room. Then a voice cut through the speakers, cold, commanding. Target in range, engage. Rook lunged, driven not by choice, but fear. A figure was shoved into the room, screaming. Rook snapped, not killing, but taking down with precision. The man screamed. Then the video cut. The voice. Caleb knew that voice. He'd heard it years ago, giving orders during special deliveries. Orders to move crates, don't open them. Orders to not ask questions. It was Lawrence Reddick. The room felt smaller now. Caleb stood slowly, turning from the screen. Rook hadn't looked away. Not once. He watched it all. And when it ended, he looked at Caleb. Not ashamed. Not broken. Just aware. Natalie stepped back. I don't know what you're planning, she said softly. But whatever it is, be careful. Reddick's not just some lunatic with a bad hobby. He's got reach. And secrets. Caleb nodded. So do I. He drove back to the cabin in silence, Rook in the passenger seat. The dog didn't tremble like before. He stared straight ahead, steady and alert. Back home, Caleb pulled out a faded notebook, the same one he'd once used to record trail markings and job routes. Now, it became something else. He listed names: Reddick, Harper Ranch, Crossbow Facility, dates, events, the signature on the shipping log, his own guilt in ink. And at the bottom of the page, he wrote, "We knew. We didn't stop it. Now we will." That night, the air was still. Rook lay by the fire, finally resting, head on Caleb's boot like a final, fragile truce. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines. A storm was coming. But for the first time, Caleb didn't feel alone in it. He had Rook, and Rook had him. The sun rose blood orange behind the jagged peaks of the snowy range. Caleb stood on the porch of his cabin. a thermos of black coffee cooling in his grip. The trees rustled with wind and warning. Rook lay at his side, head high, ears up. They both sensed it. The end wasn't far off now. Inside, the evidence sat in a locked metal case. The burned documents, the photos of scarred German shepherds, the training logs, the receipts with Reddick's name stamped, and Caleb's own signature scribbled years ago. Proof that silence had once made him complicit. And now, silence would be the last thing anyone would get from him. He picked up the case, slung his pack over one shoulder, and turned to the dog. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Rook stood. His limp was still there, but less pronounced. Caleb could almost imagine a different life for the two of them, one where this journey had never been necessary. But that life wasn't theirs. Not yet. They drove south, tracing old logging roads through the high plains until the forest thinned and the sky opened wide. Deputy Marshal Aaron Blake was already waiting near the rickety bridge over the North Platte River, engine idling, boot tapping. She wore no uniform, just jeans, a flannel shirt, and the face of someone who knew too much and trusted too little. "You sure about this?" she asked, popping the trunk for Caleb's case. Caleb nodded. "Reddick's still out there, but not for long." Blake stared at Rook. "He leading us in?" Caleb didn't answer. Rook already was. The old compound Reddick had used, the one linked to Crossbow, Harper Ranch, and a half-dozen untraceable shepherd shipments, wasn't marked on any map. It was tucked deep in a hollow past the state line, where GPS lost signal and the pines grew so close they whispered secrets to each other. By the time they arrived, the place looked like it had been swallowed by time. A sagging bunker, a rusted kennel system, high fencing topped with coiled barbed wire. The gate hung open. Rook's growl was low, steady. He stepped forward, tail stiff, nose twitching. Blake whispered into her radio. "Perimeter breach, engaging." They moved in together, Caleb and Blake flanking Rook as he led them down the gravel path, through the gate, past the kennel ruins, and toward a half-buried training shack. There were fresh tracks in the dust. Someone had been here recently. Suddenly, a crack echoed from the side barn. "Down!" Blake barked, drawing her weapon as a shadow moved fast through the wreckage. Caleb shielded Rook with his body, scanning the angle, calculating instinctively like he used to in wildfire zones. A man emerged, graying, hunched, wearing a tactical vest and a twisted smirk. Lawrence Reddick. "Well, well," he sneered, gun raised. "If it isn't the woodsman and his mutt." Caleb stepped forward. "It's over, Reddick." Reddick chuckled, soulless. "You think a couple of burned documents and a broken dog are going to take me down?" "I don't think it," Caleb replied. "I know it." In a flash, Rook bolted, not attacking but cutting sideways across Reddick's field of view. The man pivoted instinctively, tracking the dog's movement. That was the opening Blake needed. 2 shots cracked through the trees, one in the shoulder, one in the thigh. Reddick dropped like a rag doll. Rook stopped and stood over him, teeth bared, not biting, just watching. Blake kicked the gun away and cuffed him. "You have the right to remain silent," she said, voice calm. "But we both know you won't." Caleb knelt beside Rook and looked him in the eye. "You okay?" The dog licked his palm once. That was answer enough. It took weeks to untangle the rest. Blake and her team worked through the evidence Caleb had collected. The photos, the logs, the video, the chip data. They found connections to auctions across 3 states, dozens of illegal training sites, and records implicating ranchers, trainers, even former federal contractors. The media got wind of the story through leaked footage. One video in particular. The auction, the broken German shepherd, the stranger who raised his hand without a word. Millions watched, millions shared, and the world changed, if only a little. But Caleb didn't stay to watch it unfold. He had other work to do. Months later, just outside Jackson Hole, Wyoming, nestled between wildflower meadows and long whispering grass, a sign went up. High Ridge Sanctuary, a second chance for working dogs. It wasn't fancy. A barn, a few kennels, a trail through the woods. But it was clean, safe, and quiet. The first resident was Rook, no longer limping, no longer trembling. He greeted each new arrival with quiet authority, a guardian, a survivor, a shepherd in every sense of the word. Caleb never talked much about what happened before. People came, asked questions, left brochures and news articles. He nodded politely, sometimes pointed to the horizon. But when the sun dipped low and the sky lit up in orange and violet, Caleb would sit on the porch, boots up, coffee in hand. Rook would lie beside him. And in the wind, in the hush between heartbeats, there was no longer guilt. There was grace. Because this wasn't just a story of rescue. It was redemption. And the shepherd no one chose. He'd become the one who showed them all the way home.